In 1959, a group of 9 experienced mountaineers set out on an expedition in the Ural Mountains, a remote and inhospitable region of Russia. I had always been fascinated by mystery stories, and when I heard about the Dyatlov Pass incident, I became obsessed. The tragedy and mysteries surrounding the deaths of these mountaineers were disturbing, but I never imagined that my curiosity would lead me to an even more sinister discovery. As I began my own investigation, I uncovered something that was never mentioned in the official reports. There was a 10th mountaineer on the expedition. This 10th member, an amateur photographer, had been invited to document the journey. What I found in his diaries and photos completely changed my perspective on what really happened at Dyatlov Pass. In early February, the mountaineers set out on their journey, led by Igor Dyatlov, an engineering student and experienced climber. The goal was to reach Mount Otorten. Reports suggested that the group was well prepared and excited for the expedition. The 10th mountaineer, whose name did not appear in official records, was a close friend of Dyatlov and a talented photographer, determined to capture every moment of the expedition. During the first few days, everything went according to plan. The group advanced slowly through the deep snow and faced the intense cold with determination. But, according to the photographer's diary, strange things began to happen. He described an increase in tension among the group members and a constant feeling of being watched. On the third night, the mountaineers noticed strange lights in the sky. The photographer managed to take some pictures, which later turned out to be enigmatic and disturbing. The lights seemed to dance on the horizon, changing color and shape. Initially, the group thought they might be stars or ice reflections, but the lights moved in a way that was impossible to explain. The photographer also mentioned inexplicable sounds during the night, as if something large was moving through the camp. He described the growing sense of fear and paranoia, as if an invisible presence was lurking. The group tried to stay calm and move forward, but the discomfort increased each day. When I found the photographer's notes and photos, I felt a chill run down my spine. The story of Dyatlov Pass was already terrifying on its own, but these new details added a layer of horror I was not prepared to face. The presence of the 10th mountaineer and his discoveries changed everything we knew about that incident. And this was only the beginning. As we settled into our camp for the night, an unsettling feeling washed over us. The strange lights we had seen earlier were still lingering in the sky, flickering like distant stars. The cold was biting, and despite our warm gear, I couldn't shake the chill that crept into my bones. We gathered around a small fire, the only source of warmth and comfort in this desolate wilderness. Our conversation was sparse, each of us lost in our thoughts. Suddenly, one of the team members, Sergei, stood up abruptly, his eyes wide with fear. "Did you hear that?" he whispered, his voice trembling. We all froze, straining to listen. At first, there was nothing but the howling wind, but then, faintly, there was a sound. It was a low, guttural growl, echoing through the mountains. Panic set in as we tried to locate the source of the sound. It seemed to come from all directions, a haunting echo that made it impossible to pinpoint. We armed ourselves with whatever we could find, ice axes, trekking poles, anything that might offer some protection. Our fire, once a symbol of safety, now seemed woefully inadequate against whatever was out there. Hours passed, and the growling subsided, but the tension remained. None of us slept that night, our eyes darting around the camp, searching for any sign of movement. As dawn approached, the strange lights finally disappeared, but the eerie silence of the mountains remained. We decided to stay close together, not venturing far from the camp. During the day, we discovered something disturbing. One of the tents had been slashed open from the outside, the fabric torn as if by some massive claw. Inside, the belongings were scattered, trampled into the snow. It was as if something had tried to get in, but for what purpose, we couldn't say. The realization that we were not alone out here, that something was watching us, filled us with a dread we couldn't shake. Determined to uncover what was haunting us, we set out to explore the surrounding area during daylight. Our nerves were frayed, and every snap of a twig made us jump. We moved cautiously, eyes scanning the landscape for any signs of life or death. As we trekked through the dense forest, we stumbled upon something that made our blood run cold. In a small clearing, we found the remains of a campsite. It was old, the tents collapsed and covered in a layer of snow. But what caught our attention were the bones. Scattered around the site were the remains of several animals, and possibly even a human skeleton. The bones were gnawed and broken, as if by some large, powerful predator. The sight was horrific, and we quickly realized that whatever had done this was still out there, somewhere. We continued our exploration, moving further away from our camp. As we ventured deeper into the forest, the air grew colder, and an oppressive silence enveloped us. It was as if the forest itself was alive, watching us with unseen eyes. The feeling of being watched grew stronger with every step, and the hairs on the back of my neck stood on end. Then, without warning, we heard the growl again. This time, it was much closer. We froze, our hearts pounding in our chests. The growl was followed by the sound of heavy footsteps, crunching through the snow. Panic set in, and we turned to run back to our camp. But the footsteps followed, growing louder and faster. We burst into the clearing of our camp, breathless and terrified. Sergei, who had been at the back of the group, stumbled and fell, his scream echoing through the mountains. We turned to help him, but the sight that met our eyes was something out of a nightmare. A massive, shadowy figure loomed over Sergei, its eyes glowing with a malevolent light. It was unlike anything we had ever seen, a creature born of darkness and fear. In a desperate attempt to save him, we threw whatever we could find at the creature. But it was too late. With a final, blood-curdling scream, Sergei was dragged into the forest, disappearing into the shadows. We stood there, paralyzed with fear, unable to comprehend what had just happened. The realization that we were dealing with something beyond our understanding sank in, and we knew we had to leave this place before it claimed us all. As the days stretched into weeks, our food supplies dwindled, and the relentless cold gnawed at our sanity. The forest seemed to grow more oppressive with each passing hour. Every snap of a twig, every rustle of leaves, heightened our paranoia. The once cohesive group of friends now teetered on the edge of madness. One evening, as we huddled around a feeble fire, a chilling howl echoed through the trees. It was unlike anything we had ever heard, an unearthly wail that seemed to pierce through our very souls. We exchanged terrified glances, each of us silently acknowledging the growing certainty that we were not alone. Something was out there, stalking us, biding its time. That night, sleep was an elusive ghost. I lay awake, staring at the flickering shadows cast by the dying fire. In the dim light, I saw Michael, sitting apart from the group, his eyes wide and haunted. He had been quiet for days, withdrawing further into himself. Now, he muttered incoherently, his gaze fixed on something invisible to the rest of us. "Michael," I whispered, moving closer. "Are you all right?" His eyes snapped to mine, and for a moment, I saw a glimmer of the friend I once knew. But it was quickly replaced by a look of sheer terror. "It's coming for us," he murmured. "It wants us to suffer." A shiver ran down my spine. "What are you talking about?" He pointed towards the darkness beyond our camp. "The entity, it feeds on fear. It's been watching us, waiting for the right moment." Before I could respond, a blood-curdling scream shattered the silence. It was Linda. We rushed to her side, finding her convulsing on the ground, her eyes rolled back in her head. Her body twisted and contorted as if she were being pulled by invisible strings. "Help her!" I shouted, but there was nothing we could do. We watched helplessly as Linda's body went limp, her face frozen in an expression of utter terror. She was gone, another victim claimed by the forest. The group was in chaos, fear gripping us in its icy talons. We couldn't stay here any longer. We had to leave, but the forest was a labyrinth, and the entity knew its every twist and turn. As we packed our belongings, I caught a glimpse of something moving in the shadows, a tall, dark figure with glowing eyes, watching us. We set off in the direction we believed would lead us to safety, but every step felt like a descent into madness. The forest seemed to close in around us, the trees whispering secrets we couldn't understand. Our minds played tricks on us, and soon, we couldn't tell what was real and what was a hallucination. We stumbled through the dense forest, our breaths ragged and our minds frayed. The oppressive darkness seemed to cling to us, suffocating any hope of escape. Every step felt like a battle against the unseen forces that surrounded us. The entity's presence grew stronger, its malevolent energy palpable in the air. We knew we had to confront it, to face whatever horror awaited us. As dawn broke, casting a pale light over the forest, we found ourselves in a small clearing. The air was still, an unnatural silence enveloping the area. In the center of the clearing stood an ancient stone altar, covered in moss and vines. It looked out of place, as if it had been transported from another time. We approached cautiously, our hearts pounding in our chests. Michael stepped forward, his face set with grim determination. "This is where it all ends," he said, his voice steady despite the fear in his eyes. "We have to break the cycle." We gathered around the altar, feeling the weight of our situation pressing down on us. Michael opened the diary he had found, its pages now almost falling apart from age. He began to read aloud, reciting the words of a long-forgotten incantation. The air grew colder, and the forest seemed to hold its breath. Suddenly, the ground beneath us trembled, and a deep, resonant growl echoed through the trees. The entity had been summoned. From the shadows, a dark, amorphous figure emerged, its eyes burning with an unholy light. It moved with an otherworldly grace, a malevolent force of nature. We stood our ground, feeling the entity's power wash over us. It was a battle of wills, a struggle for survival. As Michael continued the incantation, the entity writhed and shrieked, its form shifting and contorting. The forest around us seemed to come alive, the trees bending and swaying as if in pain. I felt a surge of strength, a resolve to see this through. I joined Michael, adding my voice to the incantation. The others followed, and together, we chanted the ancient words. The entity roared in defiance, its form flickering and fading. We were pushing it back, forcing it to retreat. But the entity was not going to give up easily. With a final, ear-splitting scream, it lunged at us, a wave of dark energy sweeping over the clearing. We were thrown to the ground, the force of the attack leaving us dazed and disoriented. I struggled to my feet, my vision blurred and my body aching. In the chaos, I saw Michael, standing tall and defiant. He held up the diary, now glowing with a strange, ethereal light. "This ends now," he shouted, and with a final, powerful incantation, he cast the diary onto the altar. The reaction was immediate. The altar erupted in a blinding flash of light, and the entity shrieked in agony. Its form disintegrated, dissolving into the air. The forest seemed to sigh in relief, the oppressive darkness lifting. We had done it. We had banished the entity. As the light faded, we collapsed to the ground, exhausted but victorious. The clearing was peaceful once more, the nightmare finally over. We looked at each other, a sense of camaraderie and relief washing over us. We had faced the darkness and emerged stronger.